Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Bex here today to share my magical readathon spring equinox wrap up. In my TBR video, I said that I wanted to read 5 books, 4 of which I needed to read to complete my calling goal to be a spell sword. And I believe I also mentioned in that video that I usually read 3 books a month, and guess how many books I read? 3. So yeah, didn't quite reach my goal. I did start the 4th one, I just didn't finish it. And I'm going to now break down for you how my reading went, starting with the first book that I finished. The first book that I finished was Cleopatra the Seventh, Daughter of the Nile, Egypt 57 BC. This is part of the Royal Diaries series, and this fulfilled the prompt for reading a quick read, which applied to my animal studies course. This was indeed a quick read because it's a middle grade book, so the font is large, the story is not overly complicated, and it's not very long. And this is just so fun. Like, I really enjoy reading these books or rereading them in some cases. This one was super helpful for me because my ancient history knowledge is crap, frankly. My brain much prefers to retain more modern history knowledge, so this was an excellent refresher on what was happening during Cleopatra's early life, so ages 12 to 14-ish, but also there's historical notes in the back. You get family trees, you get paintings in her case, and even like pictures of coins and stuff from that time, just to sort of broaden what you might have got in the book. And so I always appreciate reading that as well. Actually, what I read in this book, it talked about Alexander the Great a bit and sort of refreshed my knowledge with those things. And it's actually come up twice now since I finished this book in the last month or so, where having this knowledge has actually been helpful for me understanding something else. So I'm really glad I read this one. I can't quite say where this falls in terms of the Royal Diaries series because I've only now reread 2 of them since I've got back on this train. It's a solid read, and it actually made me really want to pick up this Cleopatra biography that I have by Stacy Schiff, Cleopatra: A Life. This was already on my bookshelves before I even acquired this, and this I think would be an excellent book to pick up soon after reading this one, just because this kind of gives you a little bit of context, and then I think this is really going to expand on it since it was written for adults. So kind of fun when one book influences you to really pick up another one and kind of continue on a particular train that you didn't necessarily think you'd get on in the first place. The next book I finished was one that I borrowed from the library, and that is American Baby, A Mother, a Child, and the Shadow History of Adoption. This fulfilled the prompt of reading a book with the word shadow in the title, and that was for the demonology course. This one was so good. It is actually the best book that I've read so far this year, which is great. I love being able to say that. This book was well written in the sense that it was easy to read. It was easy to take in. I found myself sitting down and just reading chunks of this book at one time and not feeling like I needed to look at my phone or, my computer or anything. I just wanted to read what was there. And it was a really moving story. This book looks at adoptions in post-war America, and it does give you the wider context, but it also focuses in on the particular story of a mother and the son she was separated from. And that's the part where the emotion really comes into play. The author, Gabrielle Glazer, does a really good job of providing that extra context of what adoptions were like in America before World War II and then very much post-war, and that's where the story takes place that we're mainly following. But she interviewed a lot of different people, and she does intersperse other people's snippets of their story to kind of say, like, okay, this may have been one person's experience, here was another person's experience, and the way she fit it all together really worked. The story that we're following of this particular mother in New York City at the time, and the baby that is she's sort of forced to give up after trying so hard to keep him, that is where the emotion comes in, because they do reunite in the end, and you know this because it is talked about at the very beginning. So you know that there is this ending here, but you spend the entire book building up to it. And when you get to that reunion, obviously there's tons of things that have happened in between, but ooh, it was emotional. I almost cried. I got tears in my eyes just because I knew how tough it was and how much pain the mom had been through, and how society had looked down on her, and she'd held on to this guilt for so long. And then this son that she had to give up, who was adopted by another family, and kind of his life, and he knew he was adopted, so always, you know, always kind of wondering what happened there, and just talking about the mentality of being an adoptee and what that means. So this for me was fantastic. I mean, I can't say how much I agree with everything because I don't have any experience with adoptions in the US, but I did also appreciate how the author mentioned multiple times in many different ways that this was a particular story. It was a Jewish family, so there was that added layer of being Jewish and kind of how that affected things, but it was still a white family, and this was very much about adoption for white babies to white families in the US. And she did talk a little bit about Black and Native American children and what that meant for them, and sort of how things are nowadays and how things have shifted a bit now that we're that much farther away from World War II. But how she just put this together, it worked for me. I was emotional. I wanted to keep reading. Just all around good time. I gave it 4.5 out of 5. The only reason it didn't get a perfect 5 was because there were a few points in the story where she was giving us the background on either the mother or the son, and I just felt like I was ready to move on a little bit. Like I was ready, you know, let's just, okay, cool, wrap this up. Let's go. But that was pretty picky of me because she is telling somebody's life story and sort of building it up on purpose to this particular moment. So if you have any interest in reading this book, please do. The third book that I finished is The Collected Schizophrenias, which is essays by Esme Weijin Wang. This was for the prompt of reading a short story essay collection, and this was for the Spells and Incantations class. This one was an interesting journey for me. There were parts of this that I could really get into, and I was learning so much. And then there were other times where it did feel a bit repetitive, or I just couldn't quite understand what she was telling us. And part of that could certainly be because I don't have experience dealing with schizophrenia, and so a lot of my knowledge comes from whatever I've absorbed from the media. And so to have her perspective come in here and say, all right, well, yeah, you've seen these things, that how they're portrayed in the media, but like, here's what it's like for me to live and try to be functional with such an intense mental illness. This is very much a collection of essays and not a memoir. You do get history about her growing up in the context of a particular essay, but the essays aren't connected. There are things that are repeated between them, and although it didn't seem like they were necessarily all published separately, it just seems like she decided to write about a particular aspect and just put that into essay form. And whether it was published on another website or for a magazine or a newspaper, it's possible, but I don't know for sure. That repetitiveness, reading this as a collection, could get a little annoying at times to be like, wait, I already read that though. She already told us that. But because I think they're supposed to be all treated as very separate things, it makes sense. The beginning of this book has a lot of medical stuff in it, in terms of medical phrases and words, talking about the DSM and how people get diagnosed with mental illnesses. So if you have some background, some knowledge in that, I think it would be a lot easier for you to get through that bit. It wasn't difficult for me to get through. I just didn't quite understand everything that was being written out on the page, and so I think I might have looked up a couple things or kind of read paragraphs over again just to really understand what she was saying, because my area of knowledge is not related to that at all. But on the other hand, I liked being able to understand it, and I feel like it was helpful in the end, like going through the rest of the book, kind of understanding where society is coming from and where we are now with how we look at schizophrenia and how the medical community looks at it, and then her talking about her journey with being diagnosed eventually, because she was diagnosed with other things first, and just all the stuff that she went through. There were parts of this book that I really liked reading about, that I found really moving. There were other parts that I wasn't as interested in. She talks about fashion a bit, not a ton, but it comes up a few different times just because it's something that she really enjoys. And she also kind of talks about alternative medicine and how certain people go down that route when they're just so frustrated with not being able to get themselves better using kind of more mainstream medicine. And although it was sort of weird to read about that, it was also interesting because that's also something that I haven't really dived into very much, and to see it from her perspective and the perspective of some of her friends, sort of the community that she has found because of what she's been through. And so although at first when I was reading through this essay collection, I thought it might be a 3-star, but in the end I decided to give it 4 because there was a lot in here that I liked learning about. I enjoyed my time overall with it, and I think it's an excellent read for somebody who's looking to learn a bit more about what it's like to live with schizophrenia. I mean, she's talking about her particular experience, but I really think that she kind of let us see a lot of what she's been through. The final book that I started but did not finish was Dopesick: Dealers, Doctors, and the Drug Company That Addicted America by Beth Macy. This was for the prompt of reading a book that features healers. This has doctors and paramedics in here, and this was for the restoration prompt. So this one, I've actually read more of it since the end of April, so I wasn't quite this far. I'm now 122 pages in. I was probably about 50 pages in by the end of the month, but I am still planning on finishing this so I can participate in August with that course load all done, you know, doing some remedial restoration classes, I guess. I will say that this has been a good read so far. I'm really enjoying getting more stories of people who are really affected by the opioid epidemic, having just read Empire of Pain and getting that Sackler side of things and the family and all about them. You know, that's one perspective, the business side, the greed side. This is the side of people who are kind of the opposite end of that, people who are trying to help everyone that has been affected, and how hard they worked to try and get justice for so many. This one is a bit confusing with how the timeline jumps around. It just depends on what she's focusing on in each chapter, but I'm definitely going to keep going with it, and I am looking forward to giving the show a try after. Alright, that is everything that I read related to the spring equinox session of the Magical Readathon. I didn't start Prince Caspian, but I do plan to read this before the August fall equinox comes around, so I can be officially caught up and be where I should have been at the end of April. If you have any thoughts on any of the books that I talked about today, please feel free to leave a comment down below. As always, all of our links are in the down bar. You can go check those out if you feel so inclined. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you later.